Welcome on into the All Aussie Rules YouTube channel. We've got another video today for you. It's an AFL fixture analysis video for 2026. Fixture has been released as of today at time of recording, potentially depending what time I get this out and what time you're watching this. The fixture might have already been out for a day or so. But we're here to go through it all, so you don't have to. Will you agree with everything I say? Probably not. But the numbers behind it, there is a bit of a story behind how I get to everything. I'll try and explain it as best as I can throughout this video. But yeah, I've spent the last 4 hours now, pretty much, pumping this together for you so you don't have to do that. So let's jump into it. 2026 AFL fixture release day. So this is basically the numbers behind it. You may not be able to read much of this due to the sizing and stuff, but I just thought I'd put this at the start just so we could run through it and you could see exactly how these numbers came about. Obviously, teams are in that first column. The rating we're using for every single team is the end of last season's rating. So obviously teams do change year on year. So it's just based purely on end of last season. So, for instance, teams like St Kilda, you expect probably are going to be rated higher this year, 2026 to 2025, whereas some teams may be rated lower. That's going to happen. Not a lot we can do about that at the moment. Obviously, we can change the ratings and it would change the system completely. Potentially, we'll have a look at that sort of stuff in one of the upcoming podcast episodes if that's something that people are interested in, to see what sort of variance we could get. But we're using last season's ratings, the end of last season. So where they finished at the end of 2025 is where we're using that number for the whole of 2026. Obviously, that's not the best way to do it, but at the same time, it kind of is, just to see whereabouts teams are, their schedule is compared to what they were rated at the end of 2025. Then the next three columns are their home games, away games, and neutral games for 2026. So obviously home games are home games, away games are away games. Neutral games are any games that basically are games that either team play home games at some point throughout the year, or in the case of Gavaround, obviously pretty much everyone who's not playing home games at those grounds, but it is what it is. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, your interstate teams, your non-Victorian teams have a lot more home games, but also a lot more away games and very limited neutral games. Your Victorian teams, low home games, low away games, and a lot more neutral games. You're looking at Richmond, Collingwood and Carlton are having 13 neutral games throughout the season. A bit more than your teams like Essendon at 11. Hawthorn also 11. North Melbourne 11. St Kilda 10. Western Bulldogs 11. So a couple of them a little bit unlucky, to be honest. Western Bulldogs 5 home games, 7 away games. Hawthorn the reverse of that, 7 home, 5 away. That's just kind of how it plays out with who you play and who you play where. Next one is opposition rating. So that uses all those numbers across the rest of the screen to work out the opposition rating. Obviously, blue ones are the buys, green are home games, red are away games, orange are neutral games. The opposition rating score is basically just the start of end of season from 2025 rating, adjusted to whether it's a home game or an away game. If it's neutral, both teams stay dead level on their normal rating. Home games, you get plus 25, away games minus 25, basically. And that's just how it works out to give an average rating for the whole season. That's your opposition rating number there in column number 6, and then column number 7, using that data to work out win percentage for each game. We then have an expected wins total. So that's all the numbers that we use. Hopefully that explains it. If you want more detail, maybe I can do that at some point. But yeah, that's basically a summary of how we get what we get in the rest of this video. So let's jump into the next page. This is just ranking them in order of where they finished last season and the ratings we used for this year. As you can see, Brisbane won the premiership. They finished on top. Then it was Geelong, Hawthorn. You'll notice Collingwood would prelim team, but quite lowly ranked due to that poor end of season form. They're back in 7, Fremantle 4, Adelaide 5, GWS 6, Bulldogs 8, Gold Coast are probably the big ones there, 9, even though they did play finals and win a final. Sydney, not far behind those finals teams in 10, and then it's a big gap down to Port Adelaide, St Kilda, Carlton, and then another decent sized gap back to Melbourne, Essendon, North Melbourne, Richmond, and West Coast, a fair way back. So those bottom 3 especially, probably bottom 4 or 5, really low compared to most of the rest. So that's just based on last year's ratings. Obviously, teams will change throughout the season, off-season especially. And like the top 8 is never the top 8 again the next year. Obviously, this year we're going to have a top 10. But that's just the ratings that we're using in this video, just to kind of give us an indication of how hard or how easy a draw is based on where they were at the end of last season. And this is the hardest schedules in the AFL for 2026. Starting at the top with the hardest draw for the year, it's the Gold Coast Suns. As you can see, average rating of a 15-18. The basic numbers behind the ratings that we use here would basically make it equivalent to an average of 1,500. So anything above 1,500 is slightly harder than average draw. Anything below 1,500 is a slightly easier than average draw. Gold Coast, they played Brisbane, Geelong, GWS, Hawthorn, Melbourne, and St Kilda all twice. So obviously those first 4 all played finals last year. Brisbane, Geelong, Hawthorn, all making prelim finals. And then you've got, well, obviously 2 of them also made the grand final. St Kilda expected to get better, and Melbourne, they're probably the easiest one from last year in terms of their double up games. Of course, as we mentioned, this does take into account where you play teams. So whether you get home games against tough teams or away games against the easy teams can really affect the average rating quite dramatically. So that is taken into account in this. Something that isn't taken into account, especially when we get to the expected wins tally, is how good a team is against another team. So a team that dominates against a team every time, even though perhaps their position doesn't suggest that has no bearing on these numbers in this video. Second hardest draw, according to the numbers here, is Carlton. They were one of the most roughest teams. There's a couple here that are, but Carlton certainly is one of them. Brisbane twice, Collingwood twice, Geelong twice. Obviously, 3 of the top 4 teams from last season. Chuck in the fact that Gold Coast, another finals team, Sydney, a team that is expected to be top 8 this year, or very close to. And then the only decent double up is Essendon. So a really tough draw, in my opinion, for Carlton, which is the reverse of what they got in 2025. In my opinion, they, on paper, had a very easy draw in 2025. So a bit of a reverse there. Essendon's third toughest draw, another team that's really unlucky for a team that obviously didn't have a great season last year. Not based on opposition, but it's a lot to do with where they play their games this year and who they play and when they play them. But Brisbane, GWS, Hawthorn, all really decent teams from last season. The other 3, maybe not so much. Port Adelaide missed finals, Melbourne missed finals, North Melbourne, one of the bottom 3 teams, but still ends up with a really tough draw. Bulldogs next, a team that missed finals, have a pretty tough draw again here. Adelaide, Brisbane, Fremantle, Hawthorn all played finals. Sydney only just missed. Melbourne, another team that is probably the only good result there for the Dogs. Next up, speaking of, is Melbourne. Another team that's probably severely disadvantaged something you've got to take into account when you're doing these is lower ranked teams are going to be slightly disadvantaged due to the fact that they don't get to play themselves. Whereas top teams, so Brisbane don't have to play themselves. Brisbane were the highest rated team, so that does have a little bit of effect on this numbers as well. But Melbourne, they play Essendon, Richmond twice, which are the probably two good ones for them, but they also have Bulldogs, Hawthorn, Gold Coast, Fremantle, who you'd expect all four of them to be in that finals race. Collingwood at 6. They have Adelaide, Brisbane, Geelong, and Hawthorn all twice. Obviously, the other three teams that made the top 4, as well, the prelim final, as well as themselves, all there, as well as Adelaide, who obviously were minor premiers. They're two decent ones based on last year's numbers of Carlton and West Coast. Geelong, they play Adelaide, Brisbane, Collingwood, Fremantle, and Gold Coast. 5 finals teams from last year. Their one good one is North Melbourne. Sydney, they have a bit of good and a bit of bad there, really. They have Brisbane, GWS, and Bulldogs from last year. Bulldogs just missed finals, obviously. They have 3 teams that didn't play finals in St Kilda, Port Adelaide, and North Melbourne. However, who knows what Port Adelaide are going to be. St Kilda are expected to go up, so that could potentially be a tough draw. We'll wait and see what happens come the start of next season. But on paper, it's not super easy. Adelaide next up, minor premiers from last year. They have Collingwood twice, Fremantle twice, Geelong twice, are the 3 finals teams. Chuck in Bulldogs, who obviously just missed finals. So not an easy draw. And then their 2 better ones are Port Adelaide and Richmond is their best one there. Moving to the 9 easiest schedules. So the easiest schedule at top here. Once again, the further you are below 1500, the easier the draw. So Port Adelaide at 1474 is the easiest draw. They only get Adelaide, who played finals in 2025. They also get North Melbourne, Essendon, West Coast, 3 of the bottom 4 teams there. And St Kilda and Sydney, who potentially will make runs up the ladder. So it could potentially be a slightly tougher draw than it looks on paper. But it does look a very, very juicy little draw for Port Adelaide. Maybe they are a team that can bounce back and be in finals contention. You'd certainly expect them to beat North Melbourne, West Coast twice each. Probably Essendon as well. So potentially 6 wins right off the bat there. Richmond, second easiest draw. That's kind of where you expect them to be. Once again, they get Adelaide twice. But outside of that, it's pretty nice for them. They get West Coast, North Melbourne twice, and then St Kilda and Carlton. So Adelaide, the only finals team. GWS, probably the biggest winner, in all honesty, in this whole competition on these numbers. Fremantle also get a pretty decent run of it. But GWS, they play Hawthorn, Gold Coast twice, 2 finals teams. They play Essendon, West Coast twice, which are the good ones, and then St Kilda, Sydney could be rough for them, but based on last year's numbers alone, pretty decent there. Fremantle, they get Adelaide and Geelong twice. Outside of that, they get Carlton, Melbourne, West Coast twice, which are the good ones, and Bulldogs, obviously not easy, but a team that didn't play finals. 5th easiest is the Kangaroos. They have a super, super good draw for them. Obviously, the Geelong one is tough, getting them twice, but then outside of that, Sydney, Port Adelaide, mid-range, and then Essendon, Richmond, West Coast, bottom 4 teams there. West Coast, they get the 6th easiest. They do have 3 finals teams from last year, Collingwood, Fremantle, GWS, but they also get North Melbourne, Port Adelaide, Richmond, so it balances out there for West Coast. Hawthorn, a team that made a prelim last year, don't have the toughest draw, but it could be a tough draw. So they get Collingwood, Gold Coast, GWS twice, and the Bulldogs. So 4 of the top 9 teams there. Then Melbourne and Essendon, who are both teams that probably aren't expected to move up the ladder this year. So I don't think it gets harder than it does on paper for Hawthorn. So I think that's a pretty solid draw for them. Brisbane Lions, back-to-back premiers. somehow they get 2 teams that didn't play finals. Go figure. Oh, 3 teams, sorry. They get Collingwood, Geelong, and Gold Coast twice, which are the 3 finals teams they play twice. The teams that didn't are Sydney, who maybe go up. Carlton probably don't, and Essendon probably don't. So it's not the toughest draw for a premiership team I've ever seen, if I'm being completely honest. I think they got a pretty good run of it. Obviously, do play 2 of the other top 3 teams that made prelim finals, but it is what it is. And St Kilda, the only team that we haven't gone through, right on that 1,500 mark, 9th in the competition, right in the mid-pack. They get Gold Coast GWS that played finals last year, Sydney that just missed, and then they get Richmond, Port Adelaide, Carlton. I think that's a pretty solid draw for them. There's certainly some winnable games. They're a team that is expected to move up. We're going to learn a lot about them early season, I think, based on what we've seen and what their schedule looks like. So we'll now jump into our expected wins ladder. And it is pretty similar to the ratings that we had at the start, which suggests that the schedule balances out pretty evenly. Brisbane on top with 17, just over 17 wins. Next up, Geelong at about 16. Hawthorn, top 3 there with 15.5. Then GWS and Fremantle basically dead even, just under 15 wins for the season. 4th and 5th there. Adelaide, they're 6th. Collingwood, they 7th win with a 7th on the ladder with 14 wins. Bulldogs sneaking into the 8 with 13.9, of course. 10 teams playing finals this year, in 2026, which would mean Sydney and Gold Coast would be playing in the wildcard round against Collingwood and the Bulldogs, which would be certainly interesting. So Gold Coast 10th with almost 13 wins. Port Adelaide 11.5. St Kilda with just under 10. Carlton with 9.5. Melbourne just under 8. The Bombers at 6.5. North Melbourne just over 6. Richmond 5. And the Eagles bringing up the rear with 4. That is not how the ladder is going to finish by any stretch of the imagination. It's just a good little look to see where teams, how the schedule plays out, I guess. Obviously, we might do a separate video over the coming weeks where we do explore maybe what we expect a team's rating to be going into this next season. Typically, 2 teams go into the 8, 2 teams drop out, 2 to 3. So the way this is, only 1 team's coming into the 8 and 1 dropping out. That's probably not how it's going to be. Final thing, just based on numbers going from the rating to expected wins ladder, GWS went up 2 spots, Sydney went up 1. They were the 2 winners. And the 3 losers, Fremantle dropped 1 spot, but only just. Adelaide dropped 1, and Gold Coast also dropped 1 spot. So that's pretty much everything we have for you in this video. We'll finish up with the 9 hardest on the screen. That's how we have it. Jump in the comments. Let me know who you think has the toughest draw. Obviously, this varies a lot compared to what maybe other sites have published. I know it's definitely different than the Fox Footy one. But let me know what you think. Does your team have an easy draw? Make sure you jump in the comments. Let me know. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Plenty of AFL content, AFLW content at All Aussie Rules. Every single week, multiple podcast episodes, plenty of other videos. I appreciate your time. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. At time of recording, we're on 199 subs on the YouTube. So let's get that to 200 and keep rising up past 250 soon, hopefully. I'm Jay. This is All Aussie Rules YouTube channel. I thank you for being here, and I'll catch you on the next one.